Uh, Everybody will be back here in a minute.
Okay.
I'm gonna go to this new screen. Just hang on a couple of minutes. People are finishing their bathroom break and some coffee. So
Okay.
all right. All right, we'll be right back.
Let me grab some coffee too.
Yep. Bird. So we're recording you.
Yeah.
Kind of stay close to here.
Great. Sounds good.
All right.
Is it supposed to show on here? Is it supposed to show us?
All right. It was
No, you're good.
Yeah, the way to do this. There we go. All right. I'll let you take it away. Jose doesn't need any intro. We'll try to be soft in his voice, but
There we go. Awesome. It's going to be mainly about major gifts. Want to really talk about the theming of major gifts. We'll talk a little bit about what are major gifts, kind of the difference between activating a major gift campaign, a capital campaign, what all these things mean, and then kind of what drives major gift giving. And then towards the end, I have a small section about giving with amongst Hispanic, predominantly Spanish-speaking communities. So major gifts. I think I shared a little bit of the story yesterday, but kind of wanted to share a story kind of from the field. I remember I was about 2 years in fundraising. I was working with a Spanish-speaking parish out in East Austin called Dolores. We were meeting with the pastor, Franciscan. They were they were wanting to redo some of the things in the parish. Father was from Mexico, a parish predominantly Mexican. I would say about 80% Mexican. The rest of it was probably Mexican American. And, we were kind of going through his roster and stuff. And I remember, honing in on their top three givers and thinking about asking him about this guy who seemed like had a great giving history. All the data points showed that he was going to give a significant gift. And so I remember sitting down with Father, and Father was like, we were thinking about $100,000 request, which Spanish speaking parishes, that's a pretty big request. And Father was like, he's like, you've not seen this man before. He's like, he's a mechanic. He said, we call him in for a meeting. He's going to come in with like oil on his pants. He's like, there's no way he can give $100,000. And then, the more questions that I ask, it sounds like he has, a few shops, a few employees, that kind of a thing. And I'm like, I don't know. We really don't know unless we ask, right? So I remember having this conversation. We had a sit down conversation with Juan. I still remember today, he was from the same state my mom was from, San Luis Potosí. And remember, 100 perception really, we really don't know how generous people are, right? And that's definitely going to be a topic that I want to hone in today. Wealth does not equal generosity, right? In a lot of ways. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here today. Some quick questions on why do people give, right? What are things that drive people to giving? Number one, kind of a personal duty. Hey, I've received so much. I want to kind of give in response. Specific causes. This is definitely big in major gift giving. If you have a raise the roof campaign, or you're paving the parking lot. Faith, like I said yesterday, is a big driver of giving, even just generally. Like I said yesterday, about 80% of nonprofits are what is called faith adjacent, right? So there's a component of faith typically, and then a personal connection for people. It's personal. It's a school that they go to, it's a parish that they go to. Definition of a major gift. Major gifts are typically amongst your largest gifts of an organization, and typically for a specific cause, right? So paving the parking lot, redoing the roof, tuck pointing on the church. I know I mentioned this a little bit yesterday. A common threshold for a major gift in most organizations is about $10,000. But that includes things like hospitals and universities and that kind of a thing. I think when we're thinking about kind of our Catholic schools and the parish level, I think a good threshold is still about $5,000 for our schools and our parishes. When do you need major gifts, right? I would say first and foremost, you're probably already receiving some of these major gifts, right? Um, it's really important to steward these donors, really kind of pull reports, understand, hey, who at my parish is giving? I'd say at most parishes, if you have a donor who's giving over $10,000 a year, you should probably get one to thank them and probably just, get to know them a little bit better. That's probably someone who, if you were to launch a capital campaign, would likely give a 6-figure gift, 7-figure gift for a campaign. I'd say, a typical threshold of when to activate major gifts is when you have, I think, needs about $100,000 plus, right? So things like the tuck pointing, things like the parking lot, something that's going to cost you in that range, that's probably above and beyond your annual budget. Then I think kind of an important piece is going to be soliciting some of those top donors, right? If you're in that $100,000 range, I'd at least list your top 20 donors. We'll talk about how to solicit those and how to qualify those here in a little bit. And then there'll be kind of a broader parish approach. I'd say that typically would take about 2 to 3 months, if you're looking to make those improvements. Right? Like I said, those smaller improvements, things like a roof, tuck pointing, parking lot, which are really, really common in the church. And then when do you need a capital campaign? I would say anytime a need is, I'd say I would start exploring the need when you have a need that is about 2 times your annual budget, right? So let's say I have a $600,000 annual budget at my parish. So I'd be looking at about $1.2 million need, right? That could mean all kinds of things, right? Just to a parish yesterday whose foundation is quite literally sinking into the ground, right? And that's a huge multi-million dollar endeavor to kind of shore up their foundation. So anytime your need is above 2 times your annual budget is when I would start thinking about exploring what a campaign could look like. So for churches, a capital campaign from beginning, feasibility study to the end, should be about 6 to 9 months. If you're a small town church, it should probably be closer to that 6-month timeline. If you're probably any parish in Texas, it's probably gonna be closer to a 9-month timeline, right? So it's about a 3-month feasibility study and then about a 6-month active capital campaign engagement. And I would say, thinking about this middle block, things like the roof and that kind of a thing, I wouldn't really say that you need professional counsel for that. You just find a good volunteer. There's often, everyone knows, kind of block and tackle this together a little bit, and we'll talk about what some materials that you need. But really, when you're thinking about a capital campaign, I do think it's important to hire counsel. I talked to a parish, probably one of the largest ones in the state of Texas. Yeah, maybe about 2 months ago. And this is a parish from, my experience, could have raised like $25 million. Decided to do the campaign internally and ended up raising about $6 million. And then surprise, surprise, their building cost ended up being more like 7.5. So now they have a $6 million campaign. They've kind of already gone through the whole list. But if they would have hired professional counsel, right, they probably would have, let's say, even if they'd raised 10 million, they wouldn't really quite be in that pickle that they're in now, and probably could have funded phase 1 and phase 2 of their campaign, right? So often when you save that money, there's really opportunity costs on the other side of that for a capital campaign. What are some key components for fundraising? This is what we call the 5 P's of fundraising. Number 1, prayer. Typically when I talk to pastors, volunteers, it's really important that we frame everything that we do in praying in the Lord. That this doesn't just mean that we're bookending our meetings, opening them with prayer, closing them with prayer. But when we are making our solicitations, we're asking people to prayerfully consider this request, right? I've had multiple experiences where we requested a $100,000 request, $200,000 request. We're in that solicitation and we say, hey, is this something you can do? Sometimes they're like, hey, I can do 80. Fantastic. That's a generous gift. Great. Can you fill out this pledge card? And then they call us 2 weeks later. Consider that $100 request again. Actually, I think I can do that $100 request, $100,000 request. So prayer is effective in fundraising. Secondly, personal visits. This is kind of a dictum that we kind of have in the fundraising world, that people give to people. I think especially in this age where with emails and text messages and all the digital communications, it's really important to sit across the table from someone, schedule that meeting, making that phone call, and making that personal request. That really does go a long way. And we'll kind of go through a little bit of how to do that here in a little bit. Proportionate giving. I know we talked about this a little bit, kind of sacrificial giving, where we're asking people to give. This would definitely fall, when I said yesterday, above and beyond, right? What is above and beyond? Above and beyond what they're doing already for their annual budget is definitely would fit in under this major gift bucket. But what we specifically want to ask people is that we're asking people to make equal sacrifice, not equal gift, right? So let's say I have 3 young boys, entrepreneur, so I got like a few things in my bucket, right? But if there's someone on the other side who's, let's say, recently retired, we knew was an executive at Exxon or whatever, right? That's probably someone who could probably give it a much more generous level, right? So proportionate giving, so equal sacrifice, not equal gift. The third piece, pledge commitment, and I would also probably say pledge/documented commitment. Man, the stories that I have heard about this place will go unnamed, but I was talking to an organization who run a big shrine, a national shrine for a doctor of the church. Probably gave it out already. But they had maybe the rector about two rectors ago had a conversation once with the donor. This donor had verbally committed a $10 million pledge. Long story short, this donor, kind of is nearing his death. Kind of the family kind of gets involved in the estate. And long story short, I think they end up only getting about $2 million in cash instead of the 10, right? So it's going to be awfully important that when we ask for these gifts, that we document them and have them usually like in yes. Correct. Yeah. And that's an important thing to say kind of about pledges. They're not legally binding, right? It's a gift in good faith, but nonetheless is an important kind of, I think it's a very psychological kind of effort to say, hey, well, you know what? And two, right, as the pastor, as or the principal of a school, right? It really does kind of help really have things documented kind of in the up and up, right? Yes. Yeah. 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 That's a great question. So I think that the difference there, that's an estate gift, right? So typically when you document an estate gift, I think an important designation in documented estate gifts is that, I would always tell my team that it really doesn't count unless it's on paper, right? So in a documented estate gift, how do we document those? We really just ask them to forward that section of that estate gift from their will so that we have it on file, so that we do know it is somewhat legally binding. But I think one of the important things to know about estate gifts, I think the average person changes their estate plans something like 5 or 6 times in their lifetime. So kind of going back to that stewardship piece, it's really going to be important that we stay in front of those people throughout a lifetime. Just because they've documented a gift after their life, doesn't mean that that won't change. It will likely change, right? We should move with the assumption that it will. Yes. Mm. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I often tell people, especially when family possible. I'm working with the school right now and for a planned gift who, think about like, your if you had a list of like your top 10 food chains, this is a guy that founded one of these top 10 food chains. So he has the capacity. But one of the things that we're making sure is that his family is circled in and lined up on that decision as well. As many of those folks who are influential in that individual's life, especially for a planned gift, as possible that we can circle in. And especially as people are aging, we should definitely do that. I've heard horror stories. Um, yeah, I've heard horror stories from like, let's say a son gets really upset because, there was a $5 million gift that was given to this dog shelter and he thought that he was going to get 3 million of that. So, next thing you know, he goes to the press and says, hey, they manipulated my old father, et cetera, right? So again, kind of the importance of documentation, but then also relationships amongst the family, they are going to be really important. Key elements of major gifts. So kind of case statement, leadership, prospect, and plan. I would say this is definitely key aspects for every fundraising initiative, right? Even if I had a Giving Tuesday initiative, even if I had just a small, we're trying to buy football helmets for our high school. These are all elements that have something to do with all of fundraising. So what is a case statement? It kind of really outlines your organizational needs. It states who you are. And it's a blend of storytelling and data points, right? I think one of the great lines that we use, that we say about fundraising, it's a bit of art and science, right? There's a lot of anecdotes and data points that we can kind of give, and storytelling and pull quotes and smiling pictures and that kind of a thing. So what does a case statement look like, right? I would start first with kind of the copy, right? The writing, the what, the why, the how, call to action. Those are all pieces that are really important. We'll talk a little bit more about those in this presentation. The second piece, leadership. As I mentioned yesterday, it has been my experience, capital campaigns do exceptionally much better when the pastor leads from the front, right? What does that mean? Does that mean you're soliciting all 8,000 families in your parish? No. But does that mean you are leading a lot of the communications, you're leading a lot of the messaging, you're going to those meetings with your committee members, and really kind of encouraging the team from the front. And in a campaign, project, right? You'll probably still have committee members. You get into this in a little bit, but important pieces here are donor segmentation. We talked about equal sacrifice, not equal gift. We'll talk a little bit about what that means a little bit more. And then prospect research, right? There's a lot of data out there where essentially, you give me your list of 8,000 parishioners, I can upload it to the database. It gives me a pool of what estimated giving amounts it is that they can give, right? Just because, again, someone is rich doesn't necessarily mean that they're generous or that's even their thing. I'll talk about how complicated that is here in a little bit. And then the last piece is a plan. I would say even in kind of smaller campaigns, like even if you're trying to buy football helmets for your high school, I'd still say that there's probably a silent phase for that. Let's say football helmets are about $40,000. I don't know how much football helmets are, but let's say they're about $40,000, right? I would still probably approach maybe 3 people and ask them for 10, and you ask those 3 for 10, and then maybe you're at 20 at this point, and then you only have about halfway to go from there, right? So even in a small campaign like that, I would still have a silent phase. And then every campaign absolutely has a public phase, which is just a little bit more of a broader approach, receptions, and pew stuff. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. That's a great point. So a big thing with fundraising is momentum. Everyone wants to join a winning team, right? Which is a big reason why the Alabamas of the world have been successful forever and ever. LSU's for our Louisiana friends in the back have, won a national championship about every 10 years or so, right? People want to join a winning team. So when you show momentum and say, hey, we have this $40,000 goal, but already we're at 50% to goal, or already we're at 70% of goal, that really does help drive momentum. Allows people to say, hey, this looks like it's successful. I want to be part of this. And we'll probably talk about this here in a little bit more. You usually don't want to go into a public phase, especially for a major campaign. Probably something like a football helmet is fine, but a major capital campaign or anything over $100,000 until you're about anywhere between like 70% to goal. I would say the smaller the goal, the safer you are announcing it a little bit earlier. So even like if you're using $100,000 to pave your parking lot, you could probably announce it after raising about $50,000 and be good. But something like a $2 million campaign, $3 million campaign, definitely want to hold your horses a little bit. Case for support, right? What is the case for support? It says who you are, right? Mission, vision. Gives a little bit of the history of the church. Hey, this is where we started. This is where we are now. Working right now with a basilica in Mississippi, first cathedral in Mississippi. It's one of the kind of the greatest things for me to kind of, when I'm working with those organizations, just to kind of hear and listen to kind of the great Catholic history that we kind of have all over this country, right? There of the fact pictures, smiling faces. There's been tons of research that say if you open up a brochure and there's smiling faces, you're much better will receive that material. And then a patron saint. I think it's important, especially when fundraising in the Catholic world, identifying a patron saint for an initiative. I would say, you probably, your church is probably named, Saint X or whatever, but, thinking about who is someone that we entrust this patronage of this campaign for. A vision for the future, what are we called to do next? Hey, our church's foundation is quite literally sinking in the ground. What will happen if we don't do anything next? What is the impact of this gift, of this campaign? And then it outlines the needs, right? Typically in a capital campaign, you typically have about 3 to 4 buckets that you're looking to fund, right? So let's say it's tuck pointing, a new organ, and the parking lot, right? So outlining kind of the what's is going to be really important, and then the associated cost with those. An important piece with associated cost, guys, you guys have all probably worked with general contractors, architects. It has been my experience that their contingent costs are typically under what things end up being in the long run, right? So let's say I am working with a contractor who said he's going to do all this work for 2.5 million. I'll probably sit down with the pastor and say, okay, like let's try to keep him as close to his word as possible, but let's test a $3 million goal because one, inflation, cost of materials, especially with the upcoming tariffs, right? That's going to be a big thing for building materials. So I typically try to pad it by a round number, depending on the size of the campaign, just because, you know, what you don't want to do, like I gave that example, that kind of largest parish in the state of Texas, you don't want to say you had a $6 million goal, and then you get on the other side of the campaign, and the next thing you know, it's a $7.2 million need, right? And then you're kind of out of pocket. You have a little bit of a communications problem, right? So I typically like to pad those needs because in the end, they typically always, and if you have overage, fantastic. You can stencil that organ. Who knows, right? You can do all kinds of stuff with that. And then the next piece, a call to action. You know, what are we asking donors to consider? And then how it is that they can get involved on what it is that we're asking donors to do, what it is that we're asking volunteers to do. It's always three things. Pray for the success of this campaign. Give a generous gift and ask others to do the same, right? So pray, give, ask. Pray, give, ask. I like to call it the PGA tour. Pray, give, ask. That's what we're asking folks to do. Talking a little bit about donor segmentation, right? We'll see a little bit of a chart here in the next slide of what that looks like. Like I said, equal sacrifice is not equal gift, right? So these are all four things that we take into consideration when we're trying to identify a target request amount for an individual, right? So number one, their capacity, right? How much money do we think this individual is willing to give? What are data points that we calculate into that? I would say the two biggest ones, wealth screening, right? So what some of their wealth capacity there looks like, and then their giving history to the church, right? Again, you know, anyone who gives over $10,000 a year to their parish can likely give a six-figure gift. Affinity, right? How close are to the leadership of the parish? How much do they love this parish? Are they volunteers? You know, those data points are really important. Propensity, how often are they giving to the parish? Are they monthly givers? Do they just kind of give when there's special things? Do they love building projects and nothing else, right? And then the fourth point, access to that donor. That's exceptionally important, right? Because you could have a donor who hits all these boxes, but if you can't get to them, it's going to be hard to make a request, right? So that access is going to be incredibly important. Oh man, that chart did not transfer over well. Yes. There's wealth screening tools out there. Yeah. And any professional company is going to do some wealth screening for you. So a little bit more complicated than that. They're typically expensive and yeah. So, and it gives you hundreds and hundreds of data points. I would say too, though, just donors have also become a lot more savvy with hiding their money, right? Whether they're putting their money in a family foundation or investing it in kind of company holdings and not keeping it on cash where it's a little bit harder to trace to them. So I typically tell people, wealth screening is one data point of many, as we kind of saw in that previous chart. It's one of the four. What's more important? I value sitting across a donor, seeing the white in their eyes and talking about a campaign more than I do wealth screening and their giving history. I would say those are things that I value most. But yeah, it's definitely a good data point. That individual that I was telling you who, you know, if you were to make a list of the top 10 food chains and, you know, who was the founder for one of them, I want to say his capacity came back for like $500,000, which is by no means what he can do. There's stadiums in this man's name. So yeah, apologies for this table. Let me see. Oh, I think kind of an important point here is just kind of talking through donor segmentation. What are things that we kind of want to do when we're thinking about donor segmentation? Number one, why is a gift table like this important? Has anyone used a gift table? I know this looks bad, but has anyone used a table like this in the past? Or you've probably seen it during a capital campaign. Yeah. So why is a gift table like this important? I think it kind of allows us to see a roadmap to hitting that goal. Yes, sure.
You keep going.
Okay, so it kind of gives us a little bit of a roadmap of how it is that we kind of get to that goal. And then secondly, when we think about kind of that 80-20 rule, I think I talked about this a little bit, right? About 20% of our donors are going to give 80% of our money, right? As I said, we're asking folks for equal sacrifice, not equal gift, right? So this is a way by which we kind of start to segment that for folks. And then, it really does help us set a realistic goal and expectation for what can happen. So as you can see here, I kind of just, kind of mocked up what $1 million campaign could look like for an organization. So here I have, 8 gifts equal about $600,000, 60% of my $1 million goal. So typically, your top 10 prospects should equal about 50% of your goal. You continue personal solicitation, 70% of that goal, and then you enter that public phase. But you really start from the top, right? You solicit your $150,000 request first, then your $100,000 request, your $75,000 request, so on and so forth, so that when you do start keep meeting with donors, you say, hey, at this point, we're at 20% of goal, 30% of goal, that kind of a thing. And that momentum really does help build. And then once you hit 70% of goal, you can start doing that broader approach to the parish or the school. All right, donors and your cause. Wealth does not equal generosity. One of the things I think a big takeaway for major gift work is that major gifts are as complicated as people are, right? So although I have all these fancy charts and names and arrows and things pointing to each other and concentric circles, I would say major gifts are as complicated as people are, right? Because it's the people that are giving us the money. But I would say that this is a good illustration of kind of where it is that magic does happen, right? We talked about the capacity, the affinity, the propensity, the access to the donor, right? We talked about the case for support and how important that is. The strategy, right? How thoughtful are we being in our approach? What do we know about these individuals? Do they like things like matched gifts? Are they more interested in the stadium campaign than they are in, our locker room improvements? Leadership. Are they do they have good does our leadership have a good relationship with that individual? Right, were they paying members of the school? Are they alums themselves, right? So I would say, kind of that sweet spot is really at the middle, at the intersection of all 4 of these data points is really where you're going to get the biggest response from folks. Does that mean everyone's going to check these boxes? Likely not, right? At the end of the day, like the name of the game is making sure you sit down in front of someone and you make their request. That is going to be probably the most important thing you can do. A little bit about making the request. Some of y'all have probably already done some capital campaigns. So just kind of want to quickly run through how to make a request. What are things that you need and kind of what to say in that request. So number 1 is preparation. What do you need? I think at the very least, you need 3 things. A case for support, right? Something that, it could even be like a trifold that outlines what it is that you're raising money for, right? It could be pretty hard though to make like a trifold, let's say for like a parking lot, right? Maybe you take pictures of the potholes or whatever, and maybe it's more of a 1-sheeter, right? So that folks know the cost and that kind of a thing. But you need a case for support, something that outlines what it is that your goals are and how much it's going to cost. Second piece, I think a request letter is awfully important. It has been my experience. I've seen some folks not use request letters. Some folks use request letters. I think the importance about a request letter is that one, kind of going back to that component of prayer, in that request letter, you can write something very meaningful about how you've prayerfully considered this request and how you think this might be a right request for folks. And people really do, it has been my experience, really do sit with those request letters, especially if it's from their pastor. So if you just make a request and it's just kind of out in the ether, there's not really kind of something anchoring, right? So a request letter is awfully important. And then a pledge card. Pledge card, there's probably hundreds of examples online of something that you can pull to document at the gift. We have a question? Okay. And then the second piece, scheduling. I think the biggest thing I'll say about scheduling is make it a phone call, guys. Don't make it an email. I'd say as much as possible. There's something about hearing a voice on the other side of the phone. There's something about putting a warm hand in someone else's hand, shaking someone's hand that really makes a personal touch and really makes people know it's important, right? So how do you schedule that meeting? Say, hey, and then secondly, especially if it's your major gift prospects, it's going to be much better received if it's from the pastor, right? I'd say anyone in your top 10% of donors is probably someone that you yourself personally want to be doing that outreach for, right? Hey, it's Father James from St. Luke, just reaching out. We have some exciting plans in the future. Just wanted to make sure that you knew about them. And is there any time that we can connect? And then providing 2 times and getting that on the calendar, right? And then really kind of the last piece, right? The making their requests. I think it's important to open with prayer, centering ourselves in prayer, kind of going through the materials. This is what it is that our plans are. You've been an important part of this parish for, 10 years. Your generosity has been X much, right? And then making that ask. It's really, really important to verbalize that request. I've been in rooms before where pastors just have their solicitation letter and just say, this is for you. And then we kind of just sit there. Now, like, Father, make the request, right? It's really important to make that request, right? If I'm asking for a $25,000 gift over a period of 5 years, I want to say, hey, Luke, can you make a $25,000 gift over the next 5 years for an annual gift of $5,000? Is that something you can do, right? So that way the ball's on their side of the court. And then the next thing that you do that's really important is that you wait, right? You want to make sure that they respond first, right? I've had scenarios where we make the request, there's awkward silence for like 10 seconds. And it's easy to think about, man, what are some of the terrible things this person is going to think about? Are they going to flip this table upside down? More oftentimes than not, it is my experience that they're probably just kind of going through their mind, thinking about budgeting, thinking about what it is a realistic number that they can do. So think about positive things and after you make the request, don't say anything. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a snapshot of what a donor cycle looks like, kind of just somewhat putting this all together, right? Number one, identification. Where's this going to be for your parish and school? Likely in your database already. So going through that database, identifying who those prospective donors are, doing some research, right? Wealth screening, and probably some anecdotal data is also important, right? As well. Are they business owners? How do we know them? Who has a relationship with them? Evaluating and rating, right? We went through that table of gifts. That's kind of how you do that exercise, thinking about that 80-20 rule and then breaking people up into giving segments, determining a key request amount for that individual, setting a timeline, right? If it's a smaller, campaign for a roof, that could be about making those phone calls, doing those solicitations there. 7, 8, having that documentation, kind of express how important that is already. And then 9, recognition, right? This is something that's somewhat interesting in the church. It has been my experience, at least in Catholic campaigns, that folks don't want recognition. But I think there's like really easy, meaningful ways that you can do this, whether that's like a rosary kind of paved something or even just something like on the wall. I think just people don't want to essentially be the center of attention, but I do think people should still be recognized for their gift. And then the last piece, kind of continuous stewardship, right? What does that mean in a campaign? Thank you letters, continuous updates, making sure that they get kind of that monthly, if they are giving via envelope, making sure that they do get that monthly envelope, etc. Then lessons from the field, right? These are kind of like 4 things that I think are really important to understand in fundraising. Number one, leadership should always lead from the front, right? Again, whether it's a pastor, whether it's a principal for a school, campaigns run much better if leadership is leading from the front. And if they're not just someone who says, well, that's not part of my job description, and I'm actually at a fundraising, that campaign is likely gonna have some difficulties, right? We want leadership to lead from the front. Secondly, you really have to make the request. You really, that story that I shared of the mechanic, right? You really don't know what someone's capacity is unless you sit down and ask them for that request. Third point, activity equals money raised, right? This is awfully important in Spanish speaking parishes where we often don't have maybe some of those, 6-figure gifts, but there's probably a lot more people involved. And, the more that you can make, let's say the more solicitations that I make, the more money it is that I'm going to raise in the aggregate, right? So activity equals money raised. And then, I think this last one, your prospects are, when I think it's interesting, about half of the organizations that I engage with in conversations, I think it's odd. Sometimes they ask me, so do you bring donors to us? And I often say, and what I say is, the people who are going to give at a meaningful level to this campaign are already in your database, right? So although, the richest woman in Alabama lives in your town, there's a low likelihood that they're going to make a significant gift to this campaign, right? Just because you know them doesn't necessarily mean that they'll give a gift to the campaign. So all that to say is that your top prospects are already in your database. The bonus section here, Hispanic fundraising, probably go through this a little bit quickly for us. Just, I think 2 important things to know here, kind of understanding the landscape. One, their buying power in 2023 at an estimated buying power of $2 trillion. I lived in Chicago for about a year and a half, and it's like, I think something like 30% Hispanic. There is what they call is the Magnificent Mile. So it is kind of like it is their kind of mile that has all the luxury like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, et cetera, et cetera. That is their top GDP producing area in Chicago, right? Which makes sense. Second is a neighborhood called Little Village, 99% Hispanic, something like 70% exclusively Spanish speakers. They're all contractors, they're all painters, they're all landscapers, right? I think that kind of is kind of could show you a little bit of how much this demographic is growing and buying power. And then secondly, just kind of the presence in the church, right? Something like 50% plus of Catholics identify as Hispanics in the US. So definitely a group that we want to make sure that we're including in our plans when we do campaign work. Important trends to know about them. 63% plus of Hispanic Catholics say that they donate regularly to their parish, so something pretty near and dear to their heart. They are pretty technologically in apps like Facebook, WhatsApp. So they really do kind of probably a community that probably leans a little bit more into their smartphones than they do like their desktops, for example. So, digital giving is definitely an angle that we can go in here. And then family and community, family and community is awfully important to this demographic. Things like legacy, things like establishing something for generations to come is often successful language that works with this group of folks. And just kind of important things to know here. I'll start with personal invitations. I think it's a myth in the Spanish speaking or Spanish speakers don't give, or Spanish speakers like pledge card. It has been my experience. If they're asked to, they will. So all that to say is that personal invitations is still the most effective way to fundraise amongst this community, right? Maybe you're not asking for $1 million gift. Maybe it's a much smaller gift. Let's say it's a $10,000 gift, but still making those personal solicitations is awfully important. One of the important things too that I would highlight here, especially with working with Spanish speaking parishes, is the communities themselves are also like often in the practice of selling things like raffle tickets, things for the fiesta. So in some way or another, they kind of already kind of know the shuffle of going out. It's a little bit different than, it's less transactional. Hey, you get, 4 tickets for the raffle, but it's a little bit of the same mechanism. I remember working with a parish, Spanish speaking parish. There was a guy who they called in Spanish they called him his nickname. I don't know if I ever knew him by his first name, but everyone called him El Padrino, which means the Godfather. And I remember this guy would come to our weekly meetings every week and come with like 6 pledge cards. And I'm like, man, what are you doing? Or, it's like, how's setting up scheduling meetings and stuff like that going? Like tell us, like share with this group how you've been so successful. He's like, Jose, he's like, what I do? He's like, I know all these people here. It's like, I've been a person here for 25 years. I just get on the phone and I say, hey, it's a Padrino coming to your house. I'm going to ask you for money. And that works. I'm like, okay. So sounds a little bit soprano-esque to me, but all that to say is that personal meetings, personal solicitations really do still work in this community. Next piece that I want to review is social capital. I mentioned yesterday how in the Hispanic speaking community, there's still really do hold our pastors, I would say in higher regard probably than our Anglo community. So when you ask, they will likely have a much better response rate than your broader community. It's an important piece here to add about social capital is that often in these communities, there's a little bit of like a patriarch-esque structure, right? I think about cities, for example, like San Antonio, right, where like the family tree is big and broad, right? So if you kind of get the patriarchs on board, they could really move the needle on some initiatives. Next piece is involving ministries. It's interesting kind of dynamic, especially in like largely Hispanic parishes. Sometimes like you get more people. I've had pastors tell me, hey, we get more people to come to our charismatic prayer group than we do for like the vigil mass. So all that to say is that having a plan by which you involve your ministries is going to be really important. Rethinking events, right? This is a community that likes things like processions, festivals, that kind of thing, probably more than the Anglo-speaking community. So thinking about ways that we're engaging them in those things as well is going to be important. And then the last piece there, family legacy. This is something that really does resonate with folks, thinking about, especially when you're thinking about things like building parishes or building schools. They really think it's important to kind of invest in their family, invest in the future for going to kind of gift payments will update these folks at some of those broader community events, right? I mean, I remember like, my mom is one of 11, my dad is one of 8. I remember seeing some of my cousins only like once a year at like the parish fiesta. Right? That was probably the one time a year that they showed up at the parish, right? So thinking about ways that you leverage some of those broader events to communicate some of those uh, parish updates is going to be important. Leveraging digital engagement, I think, is awfully important. One of the things that is hard with fundraising among Spanish-speaking communities is what is called pledge fulfillment. So let's say someone does give a $10,000 gift in a pledge. You often see a much smaller pledge fulfillment rate. So sometimes it's 60%, sometimes it's 70%. And that's for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because they're no longer getting the envelopes at their house because they moved or they moved to a different city or that kind of a thing. So it's going to be really important, if we can leverage as much as like text reminders, that kind of a thing, that could be an effective way by which we can move the needle on pledge fulfillment. Rethinking our cash and debit kind of systems, right? Making sure that we have a system by which we receive cash. This is a community that's often unbanked. So I've seen parishes set up like payment remittance, like kind of coupons or receipts for people to have so that they know that they're tracking. They know that they can just come to the parish and pay their gift that way. Then providing monthly collection opportunities, right? What does this look like? This is something like a second collection once a month. Let's say the name of your campaign is, Forward in Faith, right? Your Forward in Faith campaign. Once a month, especially in the Spanish speaking community, I think it's important to maybe communicate the week beforehand. Hey guys, next week is our second collection for our capital campaign. So remember when we did that campaign X amount of years ago, you made a pledge of X. This is an opportunity by which we make our payments towards that. And that way too, just because that community just has a higher likelihood of moving, you also get a broader, probably gift participation from maybe some more new arrivals at your community. Awesome. Any questions? Yes.
I think that
Yeah. 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 It's called a gift acceptance policy, right? Most nonprofits have what is called a gift acceptance policy, right? So it outlines things like, what it is that we're willing to accept, at what level and why. Um, so I would say that's what it is. I recently had a conversation with a priest who turned down a 8-figure gift, $10 million plus. They're looking to do a building campaign, and an individual essentially wanted to have somewhat of a heavy hand in the architectural renderings. I mean, this pastor really wanted to build something beautiful, more classical, uh, more long-lasting materials, and this donor really kind of wanted a little bit more of what this priest called was a crystal cathedral. Um, so so yeah, I mean, I've had experiences where folks turned down $10 million plus gift. So all that to say is that, yeah, whether you want a formal like gift acceptance policy or not, yeah, I think it's common and within your decision making, turn down a gift that doesn't align with who we are.
this is kind of like.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, I would say to that, I think the stewardship piece is important, right? And then also, for yourselves, what it is that you're, you know, probably building some boundaries there of what you're willing to do or not do, right? I think it's important. Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Awesome, guys. Well, we can do these questions, I think, together kind of as a group. Maybe probably a good way to kind of go through this is maybe I can kind of read out the question here from the top and see kind of what the group says. Uh, Raise your hands if you would say, your top donors. Let's say, your top 10 donors in the parish. Close. We got 2, 3, 4-ish. Yeah. What would you say, of knowing those top 10 donors, what would you say has been, maybe some benefits that you've kind of learned from those relationships? Maybe some initiatives that they kind of help move forward, knowing those top donors. Yeah, yeah,
The scariest thing about looking at the door. This person.
yeah,
Sort of
yeah. Yeah. It's less transactional, right? It's like, well, father doesn't just want me for my money. Right? Second point, when was the last time you had a one-on-one one-on-one conversation with one of them? It doesn't necessarily have to be about money, right? I was at a probably a little, Yeah, probably something a little bit more private. It could be after mass, but maybe in your office, right? Or a dinner or a lunch or that kind of. I was at a I was at a major gift panel last year. So it was a mix of kind of consultants and then major gift prospects. And one of the things that stood out from that conversation to me, someone asked a donor, what do you think about, major gift officers or pastors scheduling meetings with you? What do you think about that? Like, are you kind of frustrated that they're asking so much for your time? Are you not frustrated that they're asking so much from your time? And this point would always kind of stick out with me. He said, you know what? He's like, actually, if they're not reaching out to me and if they're not asking for my time, then it just makes me feel like they're not important, which really I think is an important lesson to know. They want to make sure they're kind of in the loop and involved in those conversations. Third point, what would you say are some parish life or mission things that they love the most? Um, one of the I'm working at a few Newman centers right now, and kind of one of the points that I think kind of resonates the most with a lot of the owners is that they see a lot of folks who are like young and involved in the faith, and how, especially for some of these top donors, they see maybe some of their family has fallen away, some of their kids have fallen away from the church, and it's definitely a point that really kind of resonates with them. Is there anything in your parishes that you guys are doing that you feel like donors are really kind of excited and getting behind? I have a friend, for example, it's not really a campaign per se, but is really doing a lot to invest in like liturgical formation, right? So things like beautifying, they're not necessarily beautifying the church yet, but really doing a lot of catechesis around beauty, liturgy, reform, order, music. And that's something that like his parish has been on a journey for the last year or two. Do you guys have any special initiatives you guys feel like in your parish that you're doing? No. Yeah. That's an important point. That is what is called case alignment, right? Kind of the interesting thing about fundraising is, right, the liturgical music of St. Louis King of France is probably already in the budget, right? So you can run a Giving Tuesday campaign, let's say $50,000 for the music at St. Louis King of France, but then that $50,000 that you have in the budget now is freed up. And you can just-
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna bring it actually.
Awesome. And then I think I think we're kind of closing here. I think it's important to kind of pray for our donors by name. And just really I think kind of at the end, just knowing that unless we ask, you really don't know how folks feel towards a specific initiative and that kind of a thing. So,
Tell them that I will be there around because
do you
I'm
guys have any
waiting for
questions for me before we kind of close out?
I'm waiting for my boy to come for confession at
Awesome.
11:30. So
Yeah, thank you guys.
as soon as he comes, and then
Okay.
All right. Do we need a break? We've got about 55 minutes left.
I'm still on.
Um,
Please.
quick about- Okay, so 5-minute break. You guys, if you want to stay online on Zoom, that's great. This last part, we're going to be talking about takeaways and what are our next action items in our parish. Well, Eugene, are you giving us a tour of your parish? Everybody's on the camera. Show us
Yeah.
your. Wow. Is that a school or is that the parish?
It's a parish and a school together.
Nice. Very nice.
Let me go to the church so you can see my church.
All right, you're doing show and tell for everybody here. What's the name of the parish again?
Prince of Peace Catholic Church, Plano.
Oh yeah, Prince of Peace.
So this is the Nates.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna say in Dallas, like every parish is big. Everybody has 30 employees. Everybody's.
So this is the main church. This is Holy Water Font.
Swimming pool, mosaics. How many does the church hold?
950.
950.
Yeah. So we just renovated the church March 17, 2023.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's
Sorry.
new.
It's very much Vatican II style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the choir area. This is the dome.
Wow. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. And mosaics all around the edge. At least it's not just like weird stained glass or something. And a crucifix, tabernacle in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very beautiful. And that's all marble, it looks like, huh?
Yes.
Stone.
Yeah, this is the baptismal font.
Oh. What was the other one? The other one was the just the holy water.
Yeah, holy water font. So the space at the entrance we have a lot of small space. So the pastor decided to move the baptismal font.
Font over here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's beautiful.
So right here we have the image of our Blessed Mother.
Right.
Yeah. So this area is another entrance to the church. So we have the columbarium out there.
Okay.
So this is the chapel. Our Lady of Lebanon Chapel.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I was there last year. The
Okay.
chapel's like isn't the right. And then the tabernacle is connected to the main tabernacle, I think, right?
No,
Same wall.
it's separate. This is the
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, it's beautiful. How many does the cathedral in Tyler holds? How many
the cathedral.
in Tyler?
Ah.
Bishop
I can't,
Craig's installation. It was like, whoa, that's the cathedral.
I can't talk about Tyler, right? I'm in Dallas.
I know. We're just, yeah.
So that's all.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Are you gonna stay on? Do you want us to record this last part? Or
The
what's
last
your-
part is, I thought this is the last one.
that was the last talk. The next part we're gonna just talk about what are our takeaways. What do we and I'll send you the survey too at the end so you can give us some feedback.
Okay.
But
Okay, I planned maybe I want to go, maybe leave, and because I want to
Okay.
go to the hospital to attend to a sick person.
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for everything. Thank you. I really appreciate it and I enjoy